From Santa Barbara, California, the Timeless Voyager series, where the knowledge is timeless and you are the Voyager. Interviews with leading-edge authors and speakers, psychic phenomena and the unexplained, UFOs, extraterrestrial encounters, government cover-ups, alternative healthcare, new technologies. Fasten your cosmic seatbelts and join me, your host, Bruce Stephen Holmes, the Timeless Voyager.
Hello, everyone. This is Bruce Stephen Holmes, Timeless Voyager Radio, and with us today, Colin Andrews. Circles Phenomenon Research, CPR. They have a very interesting agenda. They are studying, I guess, and finalizing all, or at least bringing together all the information that we're learning about the strange crop circle phenomenon. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Bruce. Pleased to be here.
Let's see. Let's start this way. First of all, you, I guess this whole thing has been going on for a very long time.
Absolutely, yes. In fact, it's quite conceivable that it was going on 2,000 or 3,000 years ago when these ancient circular sites were constructed like Stonehenge in central southern England and in other parts of the world. But certainly in more recent times, we know for sure that activity of this kind was going on in southern England in the 1940 period, 40 to 46 period, and in Australia around 1965-66, and indeed several reports here in the States in the mid-70s. So yes, it's been going on for a while, but something very extraordinary happened in 75-76 in southern England, and since that time there's been a tremendous escalation around the world.
Okay, now I guess there are two things that need to be cleared up. I think the first one, obviously, is that some people still think that there were a few farmers that took credit for making this a hoax. So let's talk about that real quickly.
Sure, it can indeed be got out of the way fairly quickly. I've been studying this now with one of only 3 people in the world about 10 years ago, and indeed reporting on our findings to the Margaret Thatcher government. And so therefore we are in possession of the largest database in the world. We have features contained within this phenomenon which are not replicable by any means certainly known so far. There is a symmetry here which computers are recognizing. There is a total lack of damage in plants, even when they're brittle plants and plants that bruise easily. These tremendous markings are arriving without any damage or bruising of any kind. We have them being reported in snow cover in Afghanistan and the mountaintops in Turkey, without any footprints to or from. We're getting them from the police air support units and their aircraft over southern England in locations where human beings are not permitted to be, in the military areas there. And so therefore, and that's, believe me, only some of the reasoning, we have changes in crystalline structure of the plants, etc., etc. There is a phenomenon here of tremendous importance, and it is well beyond being conceivable that 2 elderly gentlemen, those 2 guys that I'm sure most of your listeners would have heard about in recent months, have constructed this phenomenon on a global basis. It's well beyond a hoax.
Okay, now I think probably another important point here, I'd like to try to clear these things up right in the beginning, and that is this. Why don't you tell our listeners how big the biggest circles are?
Certainly. We're looking the very largest so far, and this has only happened, I guess the escalation in size, in physical size, has occurred since 1990, and we've had markings as large as 1/7 of a mile across. Now that is a tremendous area, and the complexity, the symmetry of the markings also is something which needs to be seen to be believed. These plants are plaited into position. They are on occasions are constructed in a contraflow arrangement where at the point where the direction is reversed, those plants are literally plaited into position.
Okay, now we're going to have to back up a little bit because first of all, let's get some an idea here. Does this size basically a little bit larger than a regular American football field? Is that right?
Oh, yes, indeed. That would be something. In fact, slightly larger, I think, than an American football pitch. They are extremely large, very large indeed, and appear most of them overnight, and as I mentioned a few moments ago, without any footprints, any markings of any kind to or from them.
All right, now, how about just perhaps, since people may not be aware of pictures of these, is there a way that we can just kind of maybe describe geometrically a little bit about what these markings look like from the air?
Yes, well, in their simplest form, of course, they are simply circles, a circular area in which the plants, all kinds of vegetation, on many occasions, of course, they're cereal crops because that's the majority vote as far as vegetation is concerned in southern England in particular. But they're occurring in long grass, even conifer trees, in the rice paddy fields, tobacco plants. So all kinds of vegetation involved. In the simplest form, the vegetation is spiraled into a beautiful, symmetrical, spiraling pattern, and all of the plants are flattened, compressed to the ground, but undamaged, in a very precise circle. But then the markings became more complex in the early 80s. We were discovering, or at least the farmers and the landowners were reporting to us that they were finding circles, but indeed with single rings around, concentric rings, around that central circular feature were single rings. 2 years later, they were discovering them with two rings around them, much like Saturn would look. And indeed then we had a single report, which was literally a one-off report, of a marking with two rings, a circle with two rings around it, and a spurway, like a pathway, pushing out into the standing crop. Literally was a pathway in which the plants also were flattened and pushed out from the central circle, out into the standing crop, and terminating very abruptly at the standing wall of the wheat. That was the beginning of an evolution of patterning, which has now reached a tremendously exciting phase where we have pathways, appendages, semi-rings and semicircles all connected together in what now simply, I think, would have to be called agroglyphs. They are, that's exactly what they are. They're extremely complex, extremely beautiful, and they really need to be seen to be believed. It's very difficult to describe the more complex ones over the radio, but they are indeed extremely pretty indeed.
How many of these circles have been discovered so far?
Well in excess of 3,000, Bruce, and they're being put into the computer all of the time. We've had a further 2 discoveries in the last 7 days in Australia, and in fact I'm leaving the States in about, I think it's 2 weeks' time to go over and have a look at that in Australia. So we're looking certainly in excess of 3,000. They were arriving in quantities, I guess, of about 10 to a dozen only in that central southern England area there back in the mid and late 80s. But certainly since early 90s, 1991, there's been a tremendous escalation, and we had in 1990 alone in excess of 1,000 in just 40 square miles of southern England in the Stonehenge area.
So it is highly unlikely that that a few farmers or even 50 farmers working together could have pulled this off.
No, it's absolutely not on. It's you see, for many reasons, there's nothing in it for them to do so. In fact, frankly, what we have there in the counties of Hampshire and Wiltshire, in the Stonehenge area, is now a major problem. We have many thousands of people travelling to southern England from around the world. Not only scientific fraternity, many members of the public are travelling there to have a look at these tremendous markings, and it's causing a major problem. We have people that it seems in the excitement of the moment, determined, having travelled many miles to look at these things, are not going to be stopped by a fence around a field. They're entering the fields, they're causing a great deal of damage, and it's certainly, I've attended several meetings with my own government and the National Farmers Union in Great Britain, trying to cool, effectively, the tremendous global public response to this particular phenomenon. There's nothing in it for farmers to go out there and create the problem when they've got a big enough one to try and resolve here. And of course, even if we were prepared to accept that farmers indeed are pulling together to establish some sort of hoax for whatever reasons I don't know, even if that were conceivable, they still are unable. No human being on this planet, as far as we know, by whatever means, are capable of constructing the markings with the features, these primary features, which we've now established and recognized in the genuine marking. It's just not possible for them to do so and to pull these major features off by the sort of methods that we see from time to time on our television sets by people that are farmers, if you like, and just relating it to your hypothesis here that we're looking at farmers who perhaps are standing with chains, ropes, and all sorts of other pieces of equipment and simply trampling down these extraordinary patterns. It's not possible to do it, and there's nothing in it for them to do so, should they even be able to do so.
Now let's talk a little bit now. We'll backtrack again from something you said in the beginning. Let's talk a little bit now about what has actually happened to these plants and the phenomenon of the way that the plants are actually laying down in a particular orderliness. Why don't we talk specifically about that?
Yes, well, each and every plant, and in some of these markings, certainly the larger ones of about 1/7 of a mile long, you are looking at many millions of plants involved, and each and every one of them are laid to the ground with respect to their neighbors in a very orderly fashion. They are symmetrically positioned, and those plants are bent over at about 1/2 inch above ground level, beautifully bent over. They're not knuckled or damaged or creased, as one would expect to find if wind, for example, was involved, or if some vehicle had approached from above and flattened, compressed the plants into position. One would find creasing at that point where the plant is bent at right angles just above the ground. That doesn't happen. We're looking at plants when, for example, you're looking at an involvement of the phenomenon in oilseed rape. That's those very pretty yellow plants, plants that grow to a width of something in the order of 3/4 of 1 inch and to 2 meters in height. It's a brittle plant, and when those plants are pushed by human means beyond about 45 degrees, they will snap off like celery. It's a brittle plant, and that's the nature of it. They will just simply snap off. And when these circles appear inside, in those brittle plants, they do not break off. They bend over at right angles. They defy the very law of their own existence. And we have many plant experts around the world looking at that, and there's not a plant expert in the world yet that can tell us how it's achieved. So we really have many mysteries here, many mysteries indeed. From the ground effect to the aerial phenomena, which are being reported by many people, call them UFO if you will, but there is aerial phenomena associated with this, and the mystery is indeed a complex and a very deep one.
Now we're going to talk about all of that, but I want to just mention to the listeners who may have just tuned in that this is Bruce Stephen Holmes, Timeless Voyager Radio. Today my guest is Colin Andrews, and he actually became involved with this crop circle phenomenon in 1983 when he saw an arrangement of 5 circles in a natural amphitheater. It was the engineering aspects that actually created the circles that he became very, very interested in, and actually co-authored a book with Pat Delgado, a retired NASA engineer. Why don't you talk a little bit about that first book, Circular Evidence?
Certainly, it was very much a gamble, Bruce. We had accrued a great deal of information, that is Pat Delgado and myself, at that time working with the head of the Tornado and Storm Research Organization in England, Dr. Terence Meaden. We were the only 3 people who were researching what was happening there. And we found ourselves with a lot of information. We were beginning to receive requests from the scientific fraternity in particular, and indeed from our own government, as to the content of that data. And we felt that, indeed, we were looking at something important, clearly important. So we felt the time had come to write a book and to make it available to the whole general public, which is when we wrote Circular Evidence. That's why we wrote Circular Evidence. But the gamble was a big one, because it was quite clear that there is here an exciting mystery, and it's conjured up all sorts of connotations, and we knew that once we had, if you like, shown the hand and described many of the features which we identified with the phenomenon, that we would attract hoaxing. We, of course, prior to the release of the book in 1989, we were very happy to be dealing with a situation where we were not encountering hoaxing of any kind. It was a pre-contaminated period, if you like, and therefore that data is of paramount importance now to us all. But the book was launched. It became a bestseller in a matter of 3 weeks, hitting certainly well within the top 5 in Great Britain. It was chosen there by the Queen for her summer readings list, which gave it a particular boost, if you like. It's gone on to sell something like 100,000 in Germany in just this last 12 months. It's now been launched here in America, in Japan, Italy, and Spain, and so on. Such is the interest, and rightfully so, in something here which is happening on our planet for all of us. And Pat Delgado and myself were determined, and continue to be determined, to inform the public, because there's a great deal here which I don't think, if it was not for our persistence, you would know about. And that's why Circular Evidence was the very first step in that informative process.
Now, you are currently, at this point, contacting people from indigenous cultures and trying to connect with an earth-based understanding of the phenomenon. Would you explain that?
Yes. We have been scratching, really, I guess, reaching the bottom of the barrel in many ways with regard to the scientific approach to this research. I'm currently working with a team of about 70 scientists and engineers like myself around the world, and we're at a loss really to know how and where else we ought to be going. We've been looking at all of the surveillance techniques, infrared and low light, image intensifying. We've been looking at radiation and pH levels, looking at the molecular structure of the plants. We have made several breakthroughs in those pure scientific areas, but I became aware that information which came back from some of the Hopi Indians here in America, when they saw some of the patterns, had been shown, in fact, some of my aerial photographs that I sent over here with a friend about 2 years ago. And I felt, in having received that initial piece of information, that it was worth pursuing the understanding of these indigenous people, because we were scratching within science and within known physics to come up with an answer. And therefore it was necessary for us to listen to the Hopi Indians, listen to the Dogon people in Africa, and indeed I've only just shortly returned from Australia, and I'm just on my way there again now, in talking to some of the Aborigine people, because they do feel, all of them are at one in relating what they see as the cause of these markings, and to the meaning. That's most important. The meaning of these markings seen to them as symbols which have indeed meaning, and that we should be reacting to. So, in short, the message is a simple but a very profound one, and it came first from the Hopi Indians here in America, and indeed has now been mirrored by those other indigenous peoples, not in contact with one another, but I've been seeing them privately and they are at one in stating what we can now support by and with science, and that is we have a planet, if you like, let's term the planet Mother Earth, is in serious difficulty, and we may well be looking here at a process, an energy interaction between, really at an interface, that the interface between this dimension and other dimensions which we don't understand, there could well be here high energies, high levels of energy interacting between this living molecule, the planet Earth, and perhaps the brain end of the universe. It's an extremely deep and significant analogy, but that is indeed what is coming back from those indigenous people. Mother Earth is in serious trouble, and believe me, and you don't have to believe me, you only have to listen to your news bulletins to know how serious our global environmental problems are. With the ozone about to peel open, we have serious troubles, we have serious problems, and they see these patterns as being certainly associated with a sick mother.
And let's just cut right through this for a second, and I think what you are saying, tell me if I'm wrong, the Earth, I guess, is a living entity, highly intelligent, and it is trying to tell us about the problems that it is experiencing.
That is about it, Bruce. That is about it. You see, the snows have stopped falling on the mountaintops. The snow is, and this, the Dogons were telling us, I beg your pardon, the Kogi people here in America were telling us this 3 years ago. They were appealing to us. The Hopi Indians have been to the United Nations, and still nobody was listening when they were telling us before the ozone problem was detected that the snows had stopped falling on the mountaintops. It was no longer there to melt and fill the mother's rivers below. Her rivers are drying up. Look at the leaves on her trees, the leaves on the trees in your city, in any city in the world, and you will see how right they were. And indeed, we have a planet here which is experiencing, in evolutionary terms, a period at 10 seconds to midnight. This could well be our last opportunity to bring ourselves into order and to live in harmony with all living things. We have to learn our place in nature. And those people I'm prepared to listen to because it makes sense. And we're looking at this phenomenon with scientists, with many scientists and engineers, like I said, like myself, but we're also listening to other people. And those indigenous people who have only survived because they understood nature and how to interact with it, we must listen to them too, because it is the brothers, as they say, we are the brothers, and it's the brothers that got the planet in this mess. So I'm listening, Bruce. I'm only one of many who are listening, and we're going to do all we can to not only understand this phenomenon, but indeed to pick up on that very environmental problem, that most important environmental problem for all of our children. Because, you know, for the first time in history, we may well be living through a period when we cannot be absolutely sure our prayers will be met if we are praying for a planet which will sustain sufficient levels of quality of air for our children and water to feed them. We cannot, for the first time in history, be sure that our children will live their lives through with those basic necessities. That's how serious the problem is.
Now, the interesting point here is these, I believe they're called agroglyphs. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
All right. Now, what has happened is that by showing these pictures of the crop circles, which are now called agroglyphs, to these different peoples who understand this type of symbology or language, this is the information that we are getting.
Yes, that is right. We have, it is very difficult over the radio to explain some of the more complex patterns, but each one has a different meaning, but we are being told, and it does feel absolutely right in the equation to me, that the patterns hold not in alphabetical form the answer. They're not representative of color, shades between black and white. They have total meaning, and the meaning is recognized by the consciousness of humanity. The consciousness of mankind can be, and I believe possibly is, being moved, shifted by by simply looking at the patterns. It may sound to a lot of your listeners as if this is a guy that is not talking science at all, but we're certainly working with science. But there's something here which I think moves well beyond science and physics as we understand those subjects to be. And it is indeed, I'm meeting many hundreds of people who, and indeed here in LA, just last night, within hours of arriving, I was showing the latest video, undeniable evidence, to a gathering of people here just simply last night. And in that one room, there were a number of people who, and I can predict this because it's happening wherever I go, those people are saying to me, I've seen these patterns before. Yes, they have. They didn't see them in the fields near their neighborhood recently, probably ever in their lifetime, but they're in their subconscious. These patterns are locked up. Everything, all living things, react, live, and move with patterning. It's all there. It's already locked up in us. And you see, it's difficult to argue that the consciousness of mankind has not changed in the last 3 or 4 years. What's happened to politicians around the world? Just what has happened in Eastern Europe in the last few years. It's unbelievable, totally unbelievable. One could not have achieved that in political terms within 40 or 50 years with the Berlin Wall and the USSR situation and many others there. Politically, they've moved so fast to be beyond comprehension. Politics just doesn't move that fast. Something else is happening. And we have now the population. These are not the political leaders necessarily. It's the population, the masses, if you like, peoples who are seeing the unfolding of a scenario which is terribly important and terribly serious. And they're reacting like mice are crowded in a cage. They're beginning to react to that situation. And it simply means they're moving with the pace of the shift of consciousness. And indeed, it's only the beginning, because I don't believe we've seen anything yet.
Tell us, Colin, about the UFO information that has come up recently.
Yes, we have a great deal of UFO information. We receive many, many reports from the vicinity of these crop circles. Indeed, we have now captured on film. We have 2 very important films, video films, taken of these objects. You may be aware that I coordinated a very large surveillance operation with the British Army 2 years ago, Operation Blackbird. We were set up in a location where we knew markings were going to appear. And when I say that, the location was based upon information which the data pointed to. It was suggestive that an event would occur at a particular location near Warminster, and we were set up there with about £1 million worth of high-tech equipment to capture its arrival. Well, it's a very long story, and one I guess that you're not going to have time for to cover right now. But
well, give us a quick little rundown. We've got time.
Well, we had an event there, and the video, 2 cameras, 2 of many cameras, which were put in position there by the British Army, working with us there. And an event occurred 2 days before the end of the operation, and indeed the film video film secured from those 2 cameras was removed from the site extremely quickly. And I have to tell you, and not at all proud to tell you, that that video has never been seen since. It's not been seen since. But we have, by private means, outside of the work which we're doing with our own services in Great Britain, we have secured on film, and indeed I have it with me here in the States now, and I'm going to be showing it to your audiences here, a small disc, a very small disc-shaped object, approximately 6 inches only. It's very small across. This disc was filmed in a field where crop circles had already arrived, and was seen moving through the heads of the wheat, literally parting the wheat as it moved gently but purposefully across the field. It stopped and moved down in a tractor tire mark down to ground level. It was flashing bright light off of an apparently metallic surface. It was a bright sunny day. This is during daylight hours. And it lifted back up again, moved over to, it would appear to observe a major crop circle nearby. It arced around virtually traveling back on itself to a second formation in the same field. It suddenly tilted on its axis. There was a bright flash of light. All this is on film. We have 4 minutes worth of film of it. And it moved off then at speed away from the camera to, in fact, to lift over some trees nearby. And a tractor driver who was rolling his field, he also saw this object move over the top of him and within about 30 feet of him. Now that object, the film, has now been enhanced. It's been looked at in Japan by some processes available there. And there is no doubt whatsoever we have an extraordinary object. And that object is almost identical to one which shadowed Concorde during its maiden flight. And that film we also have filmed by British Aerospace as Concorde was airborne for the first time. An object of a very similar kind moved parallel with the fuselage of the aircraft and was then seen to lift off and move off into space at speed. Just last year, just a matter of 7 months ago, German students who were also researching the crop circles in Wiltshire, southern England, they too filmed 5 of these small objects over the top of a major agroglyph there. So there's ample hard evidence that we're looking also at aerial phenomena which may or may not be associated directly with the arrival of the formations, the ground markings, but one thing's for sure, something else is showing as great an interest in what is happening on our planet as we ourselves are. So it may well be that we have several phenomena here to research, but it's a fascinating subject, and believe me, I know because I've been supplying the reports to the British government, they are as intrigued and mystified by all this as we are. We do not have a definitive answer for these amazing patterns.
Now, let me see if I can get this straight. The one thing that is important here is that these plants, now, do these plants grow back?
If the patterns arrive early on in the growing season, in other words, if they arrive in my country between May and June, when the plants are still only 4 or 5 inches high, they will bend over, and indeed from the air you see a very precisely formed circle or agroglyph. Now, because the phenomena has arrived early in the growing season, there's a lot of growth left in the plants, and they will indeed attempt to return to a vertical position. But in so doing, they grow into a new symmetrical pattern. And in each circle, we usually find that the plants have returned to the almost to the vertical position. They are something like 2 or 3 inches shorter than the surrounding plants. And they have, from the air, from aerial surveillance photographs, we see 7 concentric rings within a simple circle, 7 concentric rings, and 48 spokes, which are radiating out of the center of the circle. Now that pattern, that new pattern, is a growth pattern established by the plants themselves during the growing season, which must in some way replicate the energy pattern that put the thing there in the first place. That too, you see, Bruce, simply is not replicable by means of hoaxing. But yes, they do, attempt to grow back to the vertical, never quite achieving it efficiently.
So the point here is that if these markings are left alone and not trampled on by investigators, we even get a next phenomenon, which is this new growth phenomena.
That's right. That is absolutely right. And once again, we have many experts who are just unable to begin to suggest what it is we're looking at here. You see, the phenomena itself is fascinating. We've brought so much out of all of this already that is new to us all. You see, we ask dowsers. These are people who have that ability, most of us have it, the ability to detect energies, natural energies, perhaps natural energies, earth energies, by means of holding bent steel rods in our hands at right angles. One has a reaction when you enter a particular energy field. You can detect for water, for example, by the same method. It's a very old method used by people many hundreds and thousands of years ago for detecting water. Well, we asked dowsers to have a look at these crop circles some years ago, and they were telling us then that there were 7 rings of energy in these circles and continued to emit energy of perhaps a geomagnetic kind. We're not sure of that, but it's possibly geomagnetic. And they were telling us then that there were 7 concentric rings in each circle, energies of energy, that is, rings of energy. I'm sorry, that's the jet lag coming through. And we only had their word for that. It was provable that each dowser was, because they were able to ratify one another's results, that indeed they were detecting something, these 7 rings of energy. Then, of course, we discovered that the early arrivals were showing that very pattern up in the growth pattern by the aerial surveillance. So those patterns are detectable by dowsing. That's the first thing to be said. Now, those dowsers then, at our request, went to Stonehenge, and we asked them to dowse Stonehenge. That mysterious site there, like so many in that part of the world, and indeed, hey presto, they found the same patterning in Stonehenge. We then, I certainly, during the winter of 1987, we then entered the dimensions of these crop circles, even some of the more complex ones, the Celtic crosses, those very powerful symbols, and those dimensions plumbed straight in Stonehenge also, into the concentric rings of Stonehenge, into the barrows that surround the site, absolutely precisely. So this was then beginning to suggest to us that we were looking at ancient geometry, and indeed that is an area which is becoming extremely fruitful. You have over here in Washington Gerald Hawkins, a well-known scientist, and indeed I should be visiting him in the next couple of days, because he's taken that one step further and has established new ratios, very ancient geometry here, which is going to, I think it's going to reveal a very interesting hand very shortly. It's an intriguing subject.
Now, are we touching on the Banbury Castle and Mandelbrot set information?
Yes, we are. Absolutely right. We had 2 very dramatic developments towards the latter end of last summer, when, as you just mentioned there was a major aerial phenomena event south of a town called Swindon, near Avebury, in Wiltshire. And perhaps I ought just to start there by relating what was experienced by a number of people. They saw a bright flash of light in the sky in this particular area, a place called Banbury Castle in Wiltshire. There was a golden flash of light, which was indeed very brief. It could easily have been lightning and nothing more. But then a curtain of light emanated from the sky towards the ground into this particular field of barley. And the edges of this beam of light were rippling. There was a rippling effect, and a ball of golden light manifested at ground level on the ground, and this then simply faded away, and the process was repeated twice within a matter of about 15-20 seconds. Well, we know now absolutely for sure that at the point where two golden balls manifested at ground level as a result of aerial phenomena, a dramatic ground pattern emerged the next morning, was discovered there by the farmer, and it was a very large formation, far too complex for me to describe to you accurately, highly complex, known as the Barbary Castle Formation, and it indeed revealed 31680 square feet as being the area of the four circular areas there. That, you see, is very significant in arithmetic cosmology and in ancient theology. It's also relevant with regard to temple architecture. We have here something, we're going to learn a lot about our history, if nothing else. But that was the Barbary Castle event. We then had, within a matter of a few days, the discovery from a pilot who was flying over Cambridgeshire, close to the Cambridge University, in fact, I think about 17 miles south of Cambridge, when he saw, he could barely believe his eyes, when he saw there what was a huge heart-shaped marking with several circles attached to the edge of the heart shape, and indeed along a major axis running down through the center of the heart, a whole series of smaller circles stretching down across this wheat field. Now, several of my colleagues attended that site within a few hours, and George Wingfield, who has also just resigned his whole-time job with IBM as a physicist in the computer industry, like I've resigned mine as a senior officer in local government, he arrived on the scene and found that what had arrived there was a replica, directly and just that, of the Mandelbrot set. Now, very briefly, the Mandelbrot set is the most complex mathematical graphic form known to man. That is a universal mathematical constant which quantifies the theory of chaos. It is a state at which order is breaking down into chaos.
This is something that was actually observed from the air.
That is right, Bruce. Absolutely. Like most of these are, we're actually conducting aerial surveillance flights twice every week across southern England, which is now well established as being a very active area for these markings. We have in an area of about, I suppose, it's an approximate equilateral triangle centered upon Stonehenge, where the greatest number of reports are being received and have been now for the last 11 or 12 years. More reports arrive from that area than any other part of the world. But you had, certainly I'm in close contact with the North American Center for Crop Circle Research near Branford in Connecticut there. And you had certainly in excess of 70 arrivals of fairly complex forms here in the States last year alone. So you're certainly not free of this fascinating mystery.
Now, what do you think would be the possibility of the Mandelbrot set occurring by mistake or through some other phenomena besides pure intention?
Well, undoubtedly it was genuine. That's the first thing I have to say, because we have now completed our tests, and we have found that the plants have changed in their crystalline structure. We had symmetry there which we recognized, and there isn't. Nature it doesn't perform like this. This has to have purpose, something here of profound importance to mankind. It has to be important. That was no hoax, and we have many other very graphic forms which are not hoaxes either. And therefore it is essential that we continue to study this, and that the public inquire gently and easily. There's no time for anything other than simply keeping a cool head, and also for study. But there's something here of importance to us all, I'm sure.
Let's take the last. We've got about maybe 5, maybe 7 minutes. I'll let you now give some theories that you probably wouldn't normally do. Why don't you just play a little bit and see what do you think this is about?
Well, I do feel now that after nearly 10 years, as far as my own involvement is concerned here, my heart tells me that we are looking at interactions of energy which are being intelligently manipulated into position. These markings are not arriving at random. They're arriving with great accuracy with respect to topography and to man-made features, many of them now in locations which it would appear are intentionally positioned to sustain maximum vision. They are there, placed there for people to see. And I do believe that we are looking at intelligence. We are looking at something which knows what it's doing. I am talking here, obviously, with data which I can support as evidence that these things are referencing not only to features like roads, highways, to hedgerows, and to the tire marks the tractors are placing in the fields when they sow the seeds and they lay the fertilizer into position. They're also referencing to color and to an accuracy of 3 millimeters. That's tremendous accuracy, and that means simply intelligence. Something knows what it's doing. And I feel that, and this is, I know, I am well aware, and I'm stating this publicly, which I'm also aware, this is a dangerous area, because when I say to you that if we're looking at an interaction with the brain end of the universe, we're looking here at what we may have been schooled into thinking was God. Now, I know it's a dangerous area, and I don't wish to become particularly involved in that, in politics or in religion. I'm simply saying that we may well be looking simply at that. We could, of course, equally be looking at extraterrestrial, because it's an external manipulated interaction. It would appear to be that. We have a great deal of evidence that points in that direction. But of course, we could also be looking at a high level of nature which we simply don't understand. The patterns are arriving at the interface between our dimension and other dimensions we know so little about. And those patterns are having an effect upon humanity simply by looking at them. I do feel that. I feel that very profoundly. I've had personal experiences myself which leaves, believe me, a hardened and rational engineer thinking that I was missing the clues, those major clues, because I was looking in a too hard-focused a fashion at science and physics. And when I stood in a field at Kimpton, a small village near my hometown, alone one night, and I tell you not ashamedly at all, I prayed. I put my hands together, and this was a frustrated guy who, after at that time, had been looking at this mystery for 5 years. And in my mind, I prayed. I said, God, if you could only give me a clue as to what this is all about. I can tell you, Bruce, with total honesty and sincerity, it doesn't matter to me, actually, if the rest of the world doesn't believe what I'm about to tell you. I know because it happened to me. And what happened when I prayed and simply asked for a clue, I had a noise arrive within 8 feet of me, a sound which has now been recorded by BBC television during another interview I was doing. It showed up there too, 2 years later. But this sound, this level of high energy, that's why I'm saying high energy. There was a purring, crackling noise, which was like electrostatic, high energy crackling near my feet. And it frightened me. It was so loud, I could not, as an engineer who I've spent a lot of my time in laboratories, I have never experienced anything like it. And my close associates, like Professor Roy at Glasgow University, he was even prepared to say to me, Colin, you ask for a clue, and what makes you think you weren't getting it? I was unable to deal with that. I very nearly panicked. I looked for the fastest way out of the field, because that energy was so powerful, I am convinced to this day that if it had chosen to have constructed a crop circle, it would have done so. If it had chosen to have broken the Earth in two, it would have done so. The energy was tremendous, and I lived for 2 years telling many colleagues about the experience, hoping they were believing I was not going off my rocker, and then 2 years later, on BBC television, we had a TV crew filming the interview, and the noise arrived there. It was recorded by them, and indeed, they had £65,000 worth of high-tech television cameras destroyed at the same time. The red lights, all of the fault lights came on the equipment, and the equipment was destroyed and was filmed being destroyed. So that's evidence. It cannot be denied. We're looking at something here of tremendous gravity.
All right, this is Bruce Stephen Holmes, Timeless Voyager Radio. We've been talking today with Colin Andrews, Circles Phenomenon Research in the USA. Colin Andrews, thank you so much for being on the show today.
It's a pleasure, Bruce. Thank you very much for the opportunity.